Welcome to Lake Cumberland Amateur Radio Association. You can find us at LCARA.net, on Facebook, on YouTube, and on Instagram. If you're enjoying the videos we're producing here at LCARA, please help our club out by hitting that subscribe button. Also, give us some feedback on our videos. Click the like button, share with anybody who may find it interesting, and be sure and hit the bell icon to make sure you get notified of the next video release.
Hello everyone, this is KY4, BDP Brian for the Lake Cumberland Amateur Radio Association. Today we want to bring you a special project, a solar monitoring panel for the abandoned repeater site. Now right now we have a solar controller installed, kind of. It's just really to test the setup to make sure that the solar panel was going to work and keep the batteries charged. And so the panel that you see here is going to be the end result. This is what we have in there right now. There's nothing wrong with this, but it's just for testing purposes. The fuses, the heavy gauge wire, and the solar charger itself. But we want to create a professional looking panel. Now, as you'll notice here, we have these large meters, analog meters, and the solar charger in the center. And if you have these kinds of bits and parts laying around, great. You could get by with a much smaller set of meters, but AC4DM, one of our Elmers in our club, has these just laying around. So why not go ahead and put those to great use? Now, if you're looking to get analog meters like that, they are not inexpensive. In fact, they could be over $100, but he's had these for such a long time, and they still work, that why not put them to good use? So he also has some aluminum stock for making panels to go onto 19-inch racks, the typical racks that you would have in IT and in telecommunications. And so here we've cut this particular panel down so that it will fit height-wise into the rack for the meters and look proper. We're also filing the edges because sometimes the edges get these little burrs on them when you cut the panels to size, and you don't want it to be a hazard. So we're taking a file and we're making sure we don't have any of those sharp edges. Now, the other thing about a project like this is to bring your fabrication skills to play. And that's one of the great things I love about being in the club, is learning some of these fabrication skills. With a video like this, you could basically build a panel almost identical to this, or one very much like it. Or maybe you could build a panel that fits your particular design and requirements. The skills that we're showing in this particular video will help you with most any project where you need a monitoring panel. Here we're marking the panel for where we want to put our center holes for the meters themselves. And so we've drilled out a hole so that we can get a hole saw in there and actually create holes of the size that we need for the backside of the meters. The backside of the meters have round protrusions that need to fit through this panel. Alrighty, so we've got everything clamped down. You'll notice that we've got a nice work area here. We've got our drill bits over there. We've got our drill. We're going to get the hole saw going here in just a moment so that we can get the two holes that we need for both meters. They're of the same size, and we're going to go to town building some of those larger holes. Tools like this you can get most anywhere, the big box stores, Harbor Freight, that sort of thing. In this case, you may have an Elmer that already has these tools, and so that's what we're doing, is taking advantage of tools that he already has. But if you don't have some of these tools, you can go get them. They're readily available. We've got the drill bits on the left, we've got the hole saw here, and you'll be amazed at how many projects you'll pull these particular types of tools out. Our panel is just about ready with the holes in the positions we need them for the meters themselves. We're just doing the second one here, but you can see the first one being drilled in the previous section. And that will give us the left and right side ready to go for the meters. We'll still need to do the middle for the solar charger, and as we'll see a little bit later in this video, for the wiring harness on the backside. Now, believe it or not, I can actually put a tool in my hand, so I was filing some of the rough edges on the holes that we had just created, and now we're just kind of doing some fitment where we're just making sure, are the meters where they need to be, and ultimately where do we want to put that solar charger in the center. The really cool part about working with these kinds of projects is you can freeform some of this. I mean, you could get it extremely precise, get out your ruler, make sure it's the same distance between those 2 meters, but you can eyeball it really well. And keep in mind, this is going to be in a repeater shack. Nobody's going to be looking at this but the folks that are maintaining the repeater. So we marked our holes once we had the solar charger where we wanted it with a pencil, and now we're drilling out those holes for the backside nuts for the screws to go through and the nuts to attach the solar charger to the panel. And we're just dressing up the panel a little bit there. It needs a little bit of sanding. The bare stock had been laying around and gets a little bit of corrosion, a little bit of, we'll say, dirt and grime. So we're just basically going through and sanding that off in preparation for the paint job, because what you're basically doing is keying up the surface so that the paint will adhere to the panel much better. So we have now applied our first coat of LCARA blue. You'll also notice the somewhat larger 3 holes there in the center. That's for the wiring to come off of the solar channel and to go to the backside, back from the solar panel charger to the backside of the panel. Now everybody needs a test rig. This is a small little rack that AC4DM uses to just test fitment and so forth for panels. And so what we do is we've got the panel up on the 19-inch rack here so that we can find out where our holes need to be for the panel itself, so we can actually attach it to the test rig. We're also drilling the holes here and getting the holes the size that we need for the meters. We had the big holes for the meter piece, the larger part of the meter piece that has to fit through the panel, but then there's 4 screw holes in each corner that we needed to drill in the right locations, and that's what we were doing there. Make sure those meters will fit flush as they can be with this newly painted panel. So now we're doing some test fitment once again, just to make sure that they're going to fit in place as they should, and they turned out great. Having those meters on both sides of the solar charger just looks really nice, actually. And again, the voltage coming from the panels coming into the solar charger, amperage going out from the solar charger to the batteries is for the other meter. So again, we're just getting the meters in place. Now, the next piece is attaching all the pieces together in this first phase, and that's both meters and the solar charger itself. So we want to just make sure that everything's going to look good, all our holes are where they need to be, and then affix all the elements that we have to the panel. So we're just finishing up that part of phase 1. And once we have all the pieces in place, then it's going to be time for installing the wiring. So on the back side of the panel we have all these posts, positive and negatives, and we're also going to need to put some type of an isolation piece on there so that we have a place for attaching our wiring. Here's where all 3 elements are now installed, and that was the end of phase 1 for this particular panel build. Now we're ready to start thinking about installing the wiring. Doesn't it look great? Again, you could potentially go out and buy something that does this, but we've been able to put this together in a part of an afternoon on a Saturday. And that kind of a project, you just get so much pride in building something that looks this nice. Here we do the beauty shot. There's our amp meter on the right. As I mentioned, those are not cheap. You can get the small ones for anywhere from $8 to $10. The larger ones that AC4DM had just laying around are quite a bit more expensive. And we're going to build a second panel as well for the other repeater site because we're going to install solar there as well. So we're going to have to do something similar for the other repeater shack. Now this is an isolation posts, or a couple of posts, where you can do your positive, negative type elements without it actually touching the panel and creating electrical shorts. AC4DM has been building projects like this for years, and he's got a lot of plexiglass, and we just cannibalized this particular isolator off of one of the projects he already had, off of a panel that he doesn't use anymore. The other thing we had to do is think about, well, if we're going to have power coming in, we need to put a fuse in here in case we have a lightning strike, or at least lightning nearby that comes up through. So we took a typical fuse but we need to install it on these posts, and the post is already the correct width and so forth from a previous project. So we actually took a hole punch and punched the legs of the fuse itself so it'll fit on these posts. You can't really find fuses with holes already in them, or if if you need that sort of thing, you can make your own. So obviously he has a tool that will punch through metal like that, and it's going to work perfectly. Where do we get the wire? Well, you can buy wire, that's not a problem, but again, if you've got panels that you're not using anymore, you can a lot of times just cannibalize from panels that you already have. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to take a panel that was in one of the racks that he has and cannibalize some of that wiring because it's going to be the right length. It already has the ends on it as well, and it'll just save you a little bit of time. If you didn't have a wiring harness, you could certainly make all the wires that you need, put the ends on, and install those. Now we're in the process of installing the isolator on the backside of this panel. Notice the voltmeter and the amp meter backside now. So now you can see the big round protrusions, and what we're doing is we're just essentially centering this isolator behind where the solar charger is going to be on the front side. The screws that we're using for the isolator do stick up some from the panel, so we also wanted to kind of create not only the screw holes, but also kind of drill them to where they sink in. The screw heads themselves will sink into the panel and not interfere with the solar charger on the other side. So we're just getting those holes, a couple of diagonal holes there for that, and then we'll smooth out those holes, take off any rough edges on the screw holes we just made for the isolator. A little bit of wiring sneaking in there in the photo on the right hand side on one of the meters. Alrighty, we have our isolator basically in place. We don't have the screws in yet, but we're just about to put those screws in, but we're not quite ready. We started looking at the screws that we had, and we thought, well, let's dig the screw holes themselves a little bit to make the heads flatten a little bit to the panel, make that screw hole where the head is concave. So that's what we're doing here, is we're taking a drill bit and essentially making them a little bit more concave. And that makes the screw heads a little bit more flush, so that they won't interfere with the installation of the solar charger that'll be on the front side. The isolator will be on the back side. So that's what we're finishing up in this particular shot. And now you can see they've been swaged out a little bit there so that those screw heads will sit a little bit flatter to the actual edge of the panel. And then we'll go ahead and install the isolator and put the solar charger back on. These little solar chargers that we're using for both the repeater sites, we still have the rough one up at the abandoned repeater site. This is going to be the permanent one. They're not very expensive at all. You can get them off of Amazon. We've got them on our website if you're looking to get a cheap little solar charger. These are not MPPTs. These are the cheaper versions, because for what we're using them for, we don't need them to be nearly as efficient as you might use. And the MPPT controllers are more expensive as well. So we're just finishing up the reinstallation of the solar charger, but if you look down from above, you can see the isolator is installed as well. Those two screw holes there to the right, or the screws sticking out there on the right, and now we're just getting the charger back in place. And you won't even see the screws that are affixing the isolator to the backside. Now it's time to get the wiring together. And one of the things you typically want to do, just to make sure you make good contact, is to tin your wires. So we have a soldering station well, he's got a couple of soldering stations out there at Worldwide Headquarters. So we went ahead and took some heavy gauge wire that's going to go to the battery, and we tin those up so that we can install those into the battery terminals of the solar charger. And that's what we're doing here. Had to futz with them a little bit to get them to work, to get them in there, trim a little bit as well. And I think we even had to take a file to them just a little bit where maybe the solder was a little bit too thick, but we did get them in there, as you can see here. And the other thing I want to bring your attention to, those three holes, remember I talked about those earlier for the wiring harness. We're going to actually take the wiring and pass it through. So we're using the middle hole to pass the thicker gauge wire from the solar charger to the back side of the panel. So you won't see a lot of wiring on the front side of the panel at all. You'll see the wiring come on off the solar charger, going through the 3 screw holes. One of the holes. One hole is for input voltage, one is to go to the batteries, and one is the output voltage. So we're getting some of the posts and the wiring to the posts. You can see that we have a negative lead already affixed to the panel there to the right, the black lead. We've got one of the positive leads going to one of the meters. For voltage, you need a positive and a negative, so we're hooking that up. For the amperage meter, you actually are in series, so it's positive to positive in series going to the batteries. So here we're actually putting on a terminal, a little I terminal, so that we can affix it to the posts for either the back side of the panel or for the isolation elements for the positive terminals. And a crimper is going to come into the video here in just a moment. You can tell these crimpers have been around the block quite a bit. So that's the basic process, and now it's mainly hooking up the meters as correctly as we can with the wiring, that we're not only cannibalizing but also in some cases creating. And again, on the voltmeter, you got to go negative and positive for voltage to work correctly. For the amp meter, it's actually going to be in series. The voltmeter is the far one in this picture. The amp meter is the one that he's working with right now, if I'm not mistaken. Actually, that might be the voltmeter, but in any event, you can see we're just attaching the wires to the back posts on these meters. It's a pretty easy install, really, just making sure you've got your wire. No, in fact, that is the amp meter. If you notice, it's positive and positive. So we've got 2 red lines, so that'll be the amperage meter, and that'll be going to the batteries. Setting up some more wires here for a auxiliary power output that the solar charger has. Solar charger has voltage coming in from the panels as well as current, and then we have output going to the batteries. But we also have an auxiliary power option for the solar charger where you can power up your gear. So we're tinting the smaller leads for this, and we have the Anderson power poles already attached to the other end. Finalizing some of the wiring install here, and we've installed the wiring going to the batteries, installed the wiring coming from the solar panel, and now we're also installing the wiring for the accessory, or the Anderson power pole powering option. Well, that's kind of what it looks like on the back side. You can see we've got wiring coming in from the front, coming into the back side, and we're still on the test rig there, but just we've got it turned on its side there a little bit so that we can work with the different posts and so forth. And everything's clean, everything's got the right connectors, everything's been soldered that needs to be soldered. And now we've got the beauty shot here on the solar channel with the wiring coming through those holes. Did you have to do that, or did we have to do that? No. Does it look better? Yeah. So again, if you've got one of those creative minds, you could do something very similar to what we've got here with the wiring on the coming out of the solar charger. Here we go, Vanna White showing you the wiring that we got. There's our fuse with those holes that we put in. You've got your voltmeter on the left, your amperage meter on the right. Now we pull out a battery and we say, well, will these meters work? Will we actually have power going into the battery? And so we're just checking out our meters here on the test rig. You can see we have voltage coming in. It's going to go through the charger, and then we'll have amperage coming out. Now in this particular case, we didn't have the solar panel connected, so we went outside and we said, well, let's do a proper test. So there's our solar panel. Now this is another panel that we have that we're probably going to install, on the 88 site, and we're just opening up the back side of the panel so we can connect the wiring from the panel to the voltage meter on the solar monitoring panel itself. So we're just kind of finishing up so we can run some tests, and we're just going to hook up our positive and negative leads coming off the solar panel over to the solar monitoring panel itself. These solar panels today have come way down in price. As we've mentioned in a couple other videos, you can get decent panels now for around $80, $90, sometimes even less if you can find them on sale. So we've got our test rig up to speed, we got everything connected, and this is a static shot, and we're just about done with this project. Voltage coming in, and we're not showing amperage in this case going out because the battery was already fully charged, but everything is working as it should. Folks, projects like this are a lot of fun. So let's go ahead and wrap up the video. You can see a little bit of current going into the battery there on a cloudy day. For the Lake Cumberland Amateur Radio Association, I'm KY4BDP Brian. I hope you've enjoyed this particular video. Enjoy projects like this and get out there and have some fun. 73s.